The next component I want to take a look at is the piano roll. The piano roll, without a doubt, is the main composition tool that I use, and I feel is the most versatile and powerful music making part of FL Studio. The piano roll can be accessed a few ways. The first is to use the shortcut on the shortcut toolbar. We can also right-click on a channel and choose Send to Piano Roll. Another way is to use the keyboard shortcut F7. Yet another way is to access it using the File menu under View, but use whatever works best for you. Once we have the piano roll window open, we can see a keyboard with a grid. This is where we will draw out notes as well as edit their parameters. For this example, I want to use the FL Keys VSTI for our sound. First off, you can left-click any of the keys in the keyboard to hear that note. The keys go from C0 all the way up to E10, so I don't think you'll ever be left wanting for higher or lower octaves. To insert notes, we have a set of tools up in the top left-hand corner of the window. The first is the pencil tool. We'll select that by left-clicking it if it isn't already selected, and then we'll left-click on the grid. A note will be inserted for the corresponding note on the keyboard. Now, one thing to point out is that each note you draw will mirror the previous note or the last note that you clicked on in length. So if we have 3 notes of differing lengths, the last note that I drew will be the next note length. If I want to quickly change my note setting, I can click on a note similar to what I want to put down and then draw the note, and it will mirror that one. You can move the note by hovering over it until the cursor changes into a 4-point cursor, and then left-clicking and dragging around the screen. You can also resize the note by moving the cursor to the leftmost end of the note until the cursor becomes a 2-sided arrow, then left-clicking and dragging. The increment with which the note will be extended is determined by the snap selector. We can change our snap settings, and the note will be changed by that amount each time we drag. You can set the setting to none to get the exact size you want, or set it to line to snap to the next available line on the grid. One thing to point out is that if you have drawn out the note using the none setting, and then you switch back to line or another setting, each note you draw out or each resize you do will not be on the line. If you've drawn out a note too far and you don't want to hassle with trying to resize it exactly, you can double right-click anywhere in the grid and scroll to Quick Quantize, which will automatically adjust the note length to whatever your snap setting is. If you use the Quick Quantize function, be aware that it will affect all of the notes on the screen. If you only want it to affect certain notes, you can use the Select tool located in our toolbar and then select the notes that you want, or you can hold down Shift with the Select tool active and left-click to select or deselect notes. With your note selected, you can also cut, copy, and paste. To delete a note, you can either select it and hit backspace, or you can have the pencil or paint tool selected and right-click on the note that you want deleted, or choose the Delete tool and left-click to delete notes. And now this brings us to the Paint tool. If you have a lot of notes that you want to draw out and you don't want to sit there clicking for each one, you can choose the Paintbrush tool and left-click and drag. This will only draw out notes for that particular key, meaning you can't paint up and down the keyboard, only side to side, one line at a time. We also have a Slice tool, which will make cuts in notes. To use it, select it from the toolbar, then left-click and drag to perform a cut through the note. Where the red bar is, that is where the cut will take place. To make a diagonal cut, the two halves will be averaged and the cut will be placed there. We also have a zoom tool, which will zoom in on the section you click on. You can also adjust zoom by left-clicking and dragging on the box in the top right-hand corner of the window. Finally, the playback tool allows you to left-click and drag across the piano roll timeline to hear the notes played. This is a good feature for hearing individual spots in a piece. We also have the option to view the keyboard as large, small, or as note names. You can also change the note colors or the MIDI channel by left-clicking on the color panel and selecting a color, or by choosing one of the 16 MIDI channels available. This is helpful if you have MIDI data coming in playing from different channels. The slide function can be turned on and off by left-clicking the slide icon. This allows you to slide notes. It only works on some VSTIs, but most of the generators that come with FL Studio support it. To use it, select the slide option and click the grid to draw a note. You'll see the little slide icon at the head of the note. This note by itself doesn't generate any sound. It will only make sound if used in conjunction with other notes. For instance, if I have a note drawn out here and I place a slide above it and play back, you'll hear how the original note will slide up to the note that the slide note is on. The length of the slide is determined by the length of the slide note. A long slide note makes for a long slide, and a short slide note will result in a short one. Before we move on to the tools and options, I want you to notice that the timeline on the piano roll works much like the step sequencer. You can loop it by double left-clicking and dragging in the timeline area. The red highlighted area will be looped on playback. To remove, just double-click the timeline again. Remember, a note will only play if it's played from the beginning. If you start playback in the middle of a note, you won't hear anything. Again, this is because it's working off of MIDI data, not audio. The bars and beats are divided up, and when you press play in pattern mode, you'll see the position indicator scroll from left to right. If you have a note entering the next bar, even just a tiny bit, the playback will continue all the way through the next bar. This is why it's always a good idea to quantize your notes so that they line up exactly. This, however, can be a helpful feature if you need to insert silence after a pattern. You can also insert notes and change the velocity to 0 to create silence, which we'll look at here at the bottom of the screen. You'll notice that the screen for the piano roll is divided into two places. The top represents the area where you draw in data, and the bottom represents where you can adjust parameters. You can change the size of each screen by left-clicking and dragging the divider up and down. You'll notice that when you insert a note, a line appears under it. This line represents the velocity of that note, or the volume, as well as the length. To adjust the velocity of a note, left-click and drag up or down. You'll notice the line gets darker as it gets smaller and brighter as it gets larger. You can also watch the hint bar to see the percentage of velocity. If you had multiple notes, you could adjust each note's velocity independently by selecting that note or set of notes and adjusting. While adjusting with notes selected, only those notes which are selected will experience the change. You can also create fades by right-clicking and dragging. All of the notes in the path of the cursor from where you clicked will follow in a fading line. This is a great way to create some neat effects such as a drum roll fade in. Keep in mind though that you can't fade an individual note. To do that, you would need to use automation. We'll look at that a little bit later. We also have options for note properties by double-clicking a note. This will give us parameters for just the selected note or notes. We see the standard controls we've discussed earlier, as well as an invert portamento control. This basically does the inverse of the global portamento setting in our miscellaneous channel settings, which we discussed in the sampler video. We can also adjust other note parameters by right-clicking this blank area to the left. This gives us options to change such as panning, release, pitch, and the mod X and Y parameters. Note that the X and Y, or the cutoff and resonance, only work with the sampler and not with most generators. We can also adjust the channel parameters such as volume, panning, and pitch, which is a quick way to automate. Remember that the channel changes are being made to the entire channel and not just individual notes. We discussed how channel parameters such as volume are to be used like a preamp to send to a mixer track and are not to be used as the final setting. You can draw out these automation changes in the same way, but they are represented by many small, fine lines. This is also the editing screen that you get when you choose Edit Events when right-clicking on a control. We'll talk more about this in the automation video. You can deselect any notes by right-clicking in a blank area of the grid. So now that we've taken a look at drawing out notes and adjusting their parameters, I want to quickly go through the composing tools that we have available. You can open the Tools menu by left-clicking on the wrench icon on the top left-hand corner of the window. To begin, we have legato, which means joined together, meaning that there would be no silence between notes. This is a preset and will fill in any blank spaces between notes. You can also choose articulate, which allows you to adjust the length of the selected notes to form staccato, legato, and portato effects. There's also the quick quantize option, which again works based on the global quantize settings in the snap selector. And then there's the quantize function, which opens a menu with more advanced quantize functions. Red bars will appear on the grid to represent changes. You can import a groove or score file, as well as adjust some duration settings and level controls. You can also change the mode, which determines whether things like the end of the note is preserved or whether duration is retained. Making sure your notes are quantized is a great way to keep your project sounding tight and professional. If you're recording MIDI notes and you always play perfect, that's great. But if you miss notes, hold out notes for too long, or maybe you're a little bit ahead or behind, it will show on the grid. You can always use the quick quantize option to quantize the notes to the nearest line according to your snap setting. But again, I highly recommend quantizing notes that get off time. The next tool is something fun to play with. The chop function automatically chops notes into pieces. The quick chop function will chop the notes according to the current zoom level of the grid, meaning the notes will be split according to the vertical lines visible at that resolution. The actual chop menu gives us some more advanced control over how the notes are chopped. One of the great things included with FL Studio are scores or pre-made patterns. You can load one of these by left-clicking on the Open File icon and choosing a score. Once selected, you will see the changes made to the notes and then can change the time multiplier to your liking. This is another great way of getting your creativity going, as you've already got ready-made grooves all set to go. The same works for importing a groove score using the quantizer. These groove scores will allow you to have instant access to some classic grooves complete with velocity adjustments. There's also a glue function which will join together selected notes as long as they are touching. The next function is the arpeggiator function. This, again, is one of the cool tools included with FL Studio that can help you in case of writer's block. To use it, choose it from the menu. When it opens, it first appears like the chop tool, but you can select the File Open icon and you can have different folders for up to 5 note patterns. The best way to use this tool is for single long notes or chords. With the notes selected you want arpeggiated, choose the appropriate folder for the number of notes that you have and then pick one of the pre-made arpeggiator scores. Again, you can play around with the different options to get some surprisingly useful results. You can change the time multiplication as well to get the rhythm you want, as well as choose alternate pattern modes and a number of different octave ranges. There's also a gate function which can limit the notes. Try playing around with different options and different numbers of notes in a chord for some really unique results. The sync mode determines whether the pattern starts over on the next block, or starts over on the next chord if you are arpeggiating multiple chords across the timeline. The strum option gives us the ability to create a strumming effect, which is much like a guitar or stringed instrument. To use this tool, you must have at least 2 notes selected or on the screen. When you choose the strum tool, you'll have options to change the delay time between notes, as well as to preserve the ends of the notes and change the velocity and direction of the strums. This is a great tool to emulate a real stringed instrument and can yield some really realistic results. The flam tool creates a flam effect common to drumming. A flam is when one drumstick hits just before the other. This is used to give emphasis and can again be used to create realistic drum rhythms. You can adjust the time delay and velocity of the flam effect here. You can also choose absolute or relative time and whether to insert the flam note before or after the original note. The limit option allows you to transpose the current notes by right-clicking the virtual keyboard to set the root note, as well as specify a limited amount of notes that can be played by the current data. This works just like the keyboard setting that we discussed in the sampler video. The flip option allows us to flip the selected notes horizontally as well as vertically, which can achieve some interesting and inspiring results. We've discussed the randomize function in the file menu video. It's a great tool to quickly create some interesting patterns. The Scale Levels tool works by scaling all of the selected levels, which is great if you've used the velocity controls and have your note velocities right where you want, but you just want to make the whole thing louder or softer without turning up or down the entire channel. You can choose scale levels, and the proportions that you've already set will be preserved while still giving you control to raise or lower the selected notes. Finally, we have the LFO tool, which gives us the option to adjust the LFO. This option only becomes available when we're adjusting one of the channel parameters, not the individual notes. Once the LFO window is open, you can change the parameters, and they will be represented by the lines on the screen. The last portion of the piano roll options I want to cover is the options screen. In the file options, we can open and save a score. This way, if you come up with a cool rhythm or riff, you can save it to be used later, as well as use it with the chop and arpeggio tools. Here, we can also import MIDI files. We also have options in the edit item for the standard cut, copy, paste, and delete, as well as options to transpose notes up and down, as well as move left and right. There are also some selection options, such as select all and invert selection. These could be useful if you have a lot of data to work with. The bottom gives us options to convert the current automated events into an automation clip, as well as the option to insert the current settings for the selected controls automation. This means that if we have the channel volume selected, and we choose to insert current controller value, the current value for the channel volume will be inserted. This only works with the three controls that we have here in the bottom portion of the list. The Tools menu item gives us the same tools that we just covered. In the Grid item, we can change the color of the grid, as well as swap the upper and lower panels. The Helpers item offers some more great tools for increasing your productivity. The View Note Helpers option changes the grid so that the white keys are a light gray and the black keys are a darker gray. This can help as you move throughout the project without having to constantly try to line notes up. The Detect Scale option will attempt to detect the closest scale from the notes on the screen. One thing to note is that you must have at least 3 notes for this option to work. You will then see the scale in the hint bar. This scale may change depending on the notes you insert along the way. View Length in Note Properties will either hide or show the length portion of the note properties down in the lower panel. Finally, Ghost Channels will show us the notes from any other channels playing on that particular pattern. Again, this is a great tool to keep you from having to go back and forth. And if you do need to switch quickly between channels, you can left-click the channel title at the top of the window for a drop-down list. This list will show you all of the channels that are available to you for that pattern. The ones with data for that particular pattern will have a check mark beside them. This is where you can also access the note properties that are located in the left space menu. The Zoom menu item gives us some zoom options. Finally, we have a chord menu item, which is another tool for people like me who have no real knowledge of musical theory. Here, you can choose a chord and then left-click the piano roll, and that chord will automatically be inserted. Keep in mind that just like inserting regular notes, each time you click on the screen, the same chord will be drawn out until you either change it or select the None option, which can also be accessed by pressing and holding Shift and then N. The Target Channel option displays the list that is displayed at the top. You can use it exactly the same to choose from channels available in your project. The same goes for the Target Control list. The Auto Locate option will automatically select the first non-empty channel when switching between patterns. This can be used to cut down on time when moving to your next pattern by automatically changing to the first pattern that has data on it. In my opinion, this can be a bit confusing and I prefer to leave it off. We also see an option for auto smoothing. This is for our automation data down here. If you already have data, you may need to redraw it with the auto smooth option on. All it does is interpolate the data to make smoother curves. The center option will center the screen with the cursor position. This can also be used by pressing 0 on the keypad and will help you keep track of where you are in a long pattern. The last option is the Detached option, which will allow you to detach the piano roll from the main section to be maximized in a second monitor if you have one. The only other thing that I'd like to point out about the piano roll is how it interacts with the step sequencer. You can make your pattern as long as you'd like in the piano roll without changing any settings in the step sequencer. Bear in mind that once you started entering data on a channel's piano roll, the display will change to a miniature version of the piano roll, and the data where the steps used to be in the step sequencer will now be on the piano roll. On any pattern, you can have a combination of steps and piano roll data, but if you do, and your piano roll data plays for longer than your steps, you can use the loop function in the top left-hand corner of the channel window to loop the step sequencer over and over. This is helpful if you come up with a drum loop that you want to play over and over, but it only has 4 bars, and you have a synth piece going for 8 bars. Now again, I know this is a lot of information to cover, and once you start working with the program some more, you may find that you want to come back and revisit some of these topics. FL Studio is so simple yet so involved that you may find yourself discovering something new every time you use it. The options that ImageLine has included are there for you to use and to customize so that you can become a more productive and efficient musician. FL Studio delivers a one-of-a-kind interface and set of controls to cover any conceivable usage. Remember, the F1 key can give you any further information on these tools and technicalities, so feel free to check into the help file, as well as check for online resources through grooveboxmusic.com and flstudio.com. Coming up, we'll discuss one of the last pieces of the puzzle, which is the playlist. This is where you'll assemble your patterns to make them into songs. After that, we'll get down to discussing composing and producing, as well as effects and the mixer, and then we'll take a look at some specific synths and effects included with FL Studio. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.